Hi, this is May, and this is my summer English reading assignment for Lang+Lit. The book I have chosen to read for this assignment is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. It is set during the 1950s and is written through the perspective of a 16-year-old boy, Holden Caulfield. He narrates about his experiences throughout a few days when he got expelled from his high school, Pensy Prep, and arrived at his home. The two questions that I have decided to answer and talk about are, which character did you most relate to and why? And critique one decision the author made that you didn't like or disagreed with. Question 1. Which character did you most relate to and why? As stated before, The Catcher in the Rye was narrated and written from the perspective of the protagonist, Holden Caulfield. Therefore, I felt that it was only appropriate to talk about him in relation to this question. This is because as everything projected in this book is from his viewpoint, the descriptions of other characters are biased and heavily opinionated. Furthermore, there was not sufficient information provided on other characters that I could fully understand their characteristics and/or personalities. After I've read the book, I felt that me and Holden's personalities are direct or close to opposites. Holden is very sarcastic, spontaneous, and has his own hitch or prejudice that strongly influences his behaviors and decisions, but is very warm and loving towards his siblings. His pessimistic sarcasm or sarcastic humor can be seen throughout numerous parts of the book. On page 2, line 18, when Holden is talking about Pensy Prep, he states, "I didn't know anybody there that was splendid and clear thinking at all. Maybe 2 guys if that many, and they probably came to Pensy that way." Again on page 2, line 24, when Holden was talking about the football game at Pensy, he states, "It was the last game of the year and you were supposed to commit suicide or something if old Pensy didn't win." Finally, when Holden is talking about Ossenberger, a man who made donations to Pensy which Holden was not very fond of, on page 17, line 26, then the next morning in chapel he made a speech that lasted about 10 hours. He started off with 50 corny jokes just to show us what a regular guy he was. Personally, I have enjoyed his sarcasm and found it amusing. However, it is uncertain if he is intentionally making his sarcastic comments funny. This is because there are no remarks in relation to his emotions after his comments. Holden's spontaneousness appears when he impulsively makes the decision to travel back to his home before the set date. All of a sudden, I decided what I really do. I get the hell out of Pensy right at the same night and all. I just didn't want to hang around anymore. This is said on page 51, line 26. At this point or any other point in the book, he does not have a clear plan of where to go or how to get to his home. This also shows his self-dependent manner. Throughout the book, Holden's unique hitch or prejudice can be spotted. On line 1 of page 16, right after Holden's history teacher, Mr. Spencer, yells, "Good luck," after him, he says, "I never yell good luck at anybody." It sounds terrible when you think about it. He never poses an explanation to this, and the reason to why he thinks this remains a mystery. On page 20, line 4, when his dorm mate Ackley visits Holden's room, "Hi," I said, but didn't look up from my book. With a guy like Ackley, if you looked up from your book, you were a goner. For this also, he does not provide an explanation. All these personality traits that Holden possesses, I do not. Therefore, sometimes I find his actions or statements somewhat confusing. I cannot relate to these. However, me and Holden do share a common trait, which is our age. Holden, as well as I, are both 16 years old. Therefore, when Holden states that he feels depressed for no reason throughout the book, I can relate this to myself. I feel that this is because commonly teenagers have an identity crisis around this age which makes us feel unstable, triggering an unsettling emotion. For example, when Holden was spending his last hours in his dorm at Pensy Prep, he states, "I got up and went over and looked out the window. I felt so lonesome all of a sudden. I almost wish I was dead." In his dorm mate Ackley's room, on page 50, line 4, "I felt so lonesome and rotten, I felt like waking Ackley up." Furthermore, on page 98, line 21, when Holden is at the hotel in New York, he decides to call a prostitute to his room to talk. She ends up having a very bad attitude and leaves without talking. Right after she leaves, he explains, "Boy, I felt miserable. I felt so depressed you can't imagine." Finally, when he was at Biltmore waiting for a girl called Sally that he hardly knew, he has a random thought. There were about 1,000,000 girls sitting and standing around waiting for their dates to show up. It was really nice sightseeing in a way. It was sort of depressing too, because you kept wondering what the hell would happen to all of them. When they got out of school and college, I mean. I am not saying that all teenagers will feel this. However, during an identity crisis, teens tend to feel that nobody understands them or feel very lonesome. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, teenagers at the age of 16 are most prevalent to have depression. From this, I feel that it is appropriate to conclude that most teenagers will be able to relate to these random moments where they feel depressed by a certain thought without reason. Question 2. Critique one decision the author made that you didn't like or disagreed with. One decision the author made that I really didn't like was Mr. Antolini's actions and how Holden interpreted and reacted to this. Mr. Antolini was Holden's English teacher at his previous school. It can be seen from Holden's description that he really favors Mr. Antolini. Likewise, his friendly and accepting personality can be interpreted. When Holden was looking for a place to stay and calls Mr. Antolini in the middle of the night on page 174, line 9, Holden writes, "He said I could come right over if I wanted to." Furthermore, Holden explains, "He was about the best teacher I had, Mr. Antolini," on line 19, and you could kid around with him without losing your respect for him, on line 20. After giving Mr. Antolini a call, Holden had to spend the night at his house. Once he and Mr. Antolini has a conversation, Holden falls asleep on the couch that Mr. Antolini's wife had prepared for him. However, suddenly Holden wakes up to Mr. Antolini stroking his head. To this, Holden jumped about 1,000 feet and shouts, "What the hell are you doing?" on line 5. Without letting Mr. Antolini explain, he quickly packs up his stuff and rushes out the door. After this experience, Holden adds, "When something perverty like that happens, I start sweating like a bastard. That kind of stuff's happened to me about 20 times since I was a kid. I can't stand it." Page 193, line 27. Here it becomes exposed that Holden has had some unusual and somewhat traumatic experience as a child. I do not understand why the author had decided to make Mr. Antolini pat Holden's head. This has led to Holden to feel panicked and uneasy the way he felt the most of his trip. Holden was constantly in a state where he had to be cautious and alert. However, when he got to Mr. Antolini's house for the first time in the novel, Holden was shown some vulnerability and relaxation as he felt sleepy for the first time. Clearly, Mr. Antolini was an adult that Holden could trust and feel safe near. But because of his mysterious action that was left unexplained, Holden felt confused and uneasy again, and I felt that if their relationship has been distanced. The line at the end of the book on page 213, line 15, Holden states, "A lot of people, especially this one psychoanalyst guy that they have here," it becomes clear that Holden is reflecting back on these few days from a mental hospital or institute. I felt that this encounter with Mr. Antolini has made Holden even more cautious around adults. On the flip side, if Mr. Antolini has given the opportunity to explain himself, was not caught stroking Holden's head, or did not stroke his head at all, the trust between him and Holden may have grown stronger, making him an adult that Holden could rely on, stabilizing his state of mentality.